Supreme Commander Jeho stood at the massive window of the Celestial Assembly's flagship, his golden uniform reflecting the distant starlight. The Earth hung like a blue jewel in the darkness of space, looking small and peaceful from this distance. He had seen many worlds in his 300 years of service to the God King, but something about this planet made him pause. "Another primitive world," Haynul said from behind him, his voice filled with familiar dismissal. "Look at them, still burning fossil fuels. They haven't even colonized their own moon properly." Jeho turned to face his second-in-command. Haynul was young, only 70 years old, and like many young officers, he was quick to judge. "Every world has its own path. Haynul, that's something I've learned in my time." The ship's central computer chimed softly, announcing the arrival of their daily report to the God King. Both officers straightened their uniforms and moved to the communication chamber. The air shimmered, and a hologram appeared before them. Du Young, the immortal God King of the Celestial Assembly, ruler of 10,000 worlds. Even through a hologram, Du Young's presence was overwhelming. His ageless face showed both youth and ancient wisdom, and his silver eyes seemed to pierce through space itself. "Report on the Earth situation," he commanded. "My king," Jeho bowed deeply. "We have completed our initial survey. The humans have achieved basic spaceflight, have a moderate understanding of quantum physics, and have developed nuclear technology. They are divided into roughly 200 political regions they call countries." Haynul stepped forward. "They waste time fighting among themselves, my king. Their military technology is primitive compared to ours. They would be an easy addition to the assembly." Du Young's expression remained neutral, but his eyes showed interest. "And their population?" "Nearly 8 billion, my king," Jeho answered. "They are remarkably numerous for their technological level." The God King was silent for a moment, considering this information. "Send Ambassador Sangmi to make first contact. Use the standard approach. Offer them membership in the assembly, show them our power, and prepare them for integration." The hologram faded, leaving Jeho and Haynul alone in the chamber. Jeho turned to his communication officer. "Send word to Ambassador Sangmi's ship. Tell her to prepare for diplomatic contact." 3 days later, Ambassador Sangmi's sleek diplomatic vessel descended through Earth's atmosphere, heading for the United Nations headquarters in New York. She had done this hundreds of times before. First contact with a primitive world was almost routine now. Her ship landed gracefully on the designated area, causing quite a stir among the gathered crowds. Inside the UN building, world leaders and representatives had gathered for this historic meeting. Security was tight, and tension filled the air. When Sangmi entered, walking with perfect grace in her flowing silver robes, the entire assembly fell silent. "People of Earth," she began, her universal translator working flawlessly. "I come as a representative of the Celestial Assembly, a union of 10,000 worlds, under the guidance of our eternal God King Du Young." She paused, letting her words sink in. This was usually when she would begin exerting the Assembly's psychic influence, the subtle power that made other species more cooperative. But something was wrong. Sangmi kept her facial expression pleasant, but inside, she felt a growing sense of panic. Her psychic probes met with nothing. Not resistance, not blocking, just nothing. It was as if the humans were somehow immune to the power that had helped the Assembly conquer countless civilizations. James Park, the Korean-American diplomat representing the United States, stood up. "Ambassador Sangmi, we welcome you to Earth. Your arrival marks a historic moment for humanity. We are eager to learn more about the Celestial Assembly and the possibilities for cooperation between our peoples." Sangmi maintained her diplomatic smile, but her mind was racing. In all her years as an ambassador, this had never happened before. The God King's power had always worked. Always. She needed to report this immediately. But first, she had to complete this initial meeting without revealing her distress. "The Assembly offers Earth membership in our great union," she continued smoothly. We can help your world advance beyond its current limitations. We can offer you technology, knowledge, and a place among the stars." The meeting continued for several hours, with Earth's representatives asking detailed questions about the assembly, its governance, and the benefits of membership. Sangmai answered each question perfectly, drawing on centuries of diplomatic experience, but her inner turmoil grew with each passing moment. As soon as she returned to her ship, Sangmai sent an urgent, encrypted message to Supreme Commander Jeho. "Commander, we have a situation. The humans, they're different. The standard approach isn't working. I repeat, the standard approach is not working." Back on the flagship, Jeho received Sangmai's message with growing concern. He dismissed He Newell and the other officers from the bridge before opening a direct channel to the God King. "My king," he said, kneeling before the hologram. "Ambassador Sangmai reports an unprecedented situation. The humans appear to be immune to our influence." For the first time in Jeho's 3 centuries of service, he saw something he never expected to see in the God King's silver eyes, a flicker of fear. "Continue the diplomatic approach," Du Yum commanded after a long pause. "But increase surveillance. I want to know everything about these humans. Everything." As the hologram faded, Jeho walked back to the window, looking down at the blue planet below. He had always considered Earth primitive, but now he wasn't so sure. Perhaps they had all underestimated this young species. In his 300 years of service, Jeho had learned to trust his instincts. And right now, his instincts were telling him that everything was about to change. The humans' immunity to the God King's power wasn't just an anomaly. It was a threat to everything the Assembly had built over thousands of years. As Earth's cities lit up the night side of the planet, Jeho watched and wondered, what other surprises did this seemingly primitive world hold? And more importantly, what would the God King do when he realized that his power, for the first time in millennia, had met its match? The first contact with Earth wasn't going according to plan, and Jeho had a feeling this was just the beginning of a much bigger story. As he stood there, watching the blue planet spin slowly below, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Assembly had just awakened something they didn't fully understand. And in all his centuries of service, he had learned that underestimating the unknown was often the first step toward disaster. Chief Scientist Ta Wun's laboratory aboard the Assembly's research vessel hummed with activity. Dozens of screens displayed human genetic data, brain scans, and cellular analysis. He had been working nonstop since Ambassador Sangmai's disturbing report about the humans' immunity to their power. "Show me the neural pathway comparison again," he ordered his computer. 2 brain models appeared in the holographic display. One human, one from their most recently conquered species. The differences were subtle but significant. The door slid open, and Supreme Commander Jeho entered the laboratory. "Tell me you have found something, Ta Wun." The scientist gestured to the floating images. "Commander, what I have discovered is both fascinating and troubling. The human brain has evolved differently from every other species we have encountered. Their neural pathways are unique." "Explain it simply," Jeho said, studying the rotating images. Ta Wun pointed to specific areas in the brain models. "Every species we have encountered has a specific region that responds to the God King's power. It's like a door that can be opened. But humans have no door. Their brains developed without it. Is it possible to create this door?" "No, Commander. This is not something missing from their brains. It's a completely different structure. We cannot change it any more than we could change the number of chambers in their hearts." Jeho frowned. This was worse than he had feared. The God King must be informed. Meanwhile, on Earth, James Park sat in his office at the UN, reviewing recordings of the first contact meeting. Something about Ambassador Sangmai's behavior had bothered him. She had maintained perfect composure throughout the meeting, but there had been moments, brief flickers of expression, that suggested surprise, even worry. His computer beeped with an incoming call from Dr. Emily Chen, a leading neuroscientist. "Mr. Park, you need to see this. We've detected unusual energy patterns during the ambassador's visit. It's like she was trying to broadcast something, but nothing happened. Could it be a communication attempt? James asked. No, the pattern suggests it was directed at our neural systems. Whatever it was, it failed completely. James leaned back in his chair, thinking. The Assembly's representatives had seemed so confident, almost arrogant, when they arrived. But that confidence had cracked, just slightly, during the meeting. Now he was beginning to understand why. Above Earth, Hay Newell paced in his quarters aboard the flagship. We should strike now, he argued through the communication link to Jio. While they are still primitive, we cannot risk waiting. And start a war we might not win. Jio's hologram replied sharply. We know nothing about their true capabilities. Their immunity to our power changes everything. The God King will not accept failure, Hay Newell insisted. The God King will not accept rash actions that could expose our weakness to the galaxy, Jio countered. We must be patient. In his vast palace on the Assembly's capital world, God King Do-young received Ta-Wan's report with growing concern. For the first time in over 3,000 years, he felt uncertainty. His power had built the Assembly, had kept 10,000 worlds under control. The thought of a species that could resist him was disturbing. Could they spread this immunity? He asked Ta-Wan's hologram. No, my king. It is encoded in their very evolution. But, the scientist hesitated. Speak freely. If other species learn of their immunity, it could cause problems. The power of the Assembly depends not just on your ability, my king, but on the belief in that power. If they discover that humans are immune. Do-young dismissed the scientist's hologram and walked to his private chambers. The walls were lined with artifacts from thousands of conquered worlds, reminders of his long reign. Now, for the first time, that reign felt threatened. Back on Earth, James Park was meeting with the UN Security Council. We need to understand what we're dealing with, he said. The Assembly claims to be a democratic union of worlds, but their ambassador's behavior suggests something else entirely. What are you suggesting? Asked the British representative. I believe they attempted something during first contact, something that failed. We need to know what it was and why they seemed so disturbed by its failure. In his laboratory, Ta-Wan made another discovery. He rushed to contact Commander Jio, his hands shaking as he activated the communication system. Commander, you need to see this immediately. I've been analyzing human history, their entertainment, their literature. They have stories, thousands of them, about resisting mind control. It's as if they've been unconsciously preparing for this encounter for centuries. Jio arrived at the laboratory minutes later. Show me. Ta-Wan displayed countless human stories, movies, and books about people fighting against mental domination. Their culture is filled with themes of resistance against control. Their most popular stories often feature heroes who break free from mental manipulation. It's remarkable. They've been psychologically preparing themselves for resistance without even knowing what they were preparing for. And their military capabilities? Jio asked. That's another concern. Unlike us, they developed their technology without relying on psychic abilities. Everything they have, they built through science and engineering alone. Their weapons, while less advanced, are purely physical. We've never had to fight a species like this before. Hay Newell's voice came through the communication system. Commander, we're detecting increased activity in Earth's military installations. They're conducting exercises, testing their defenses. They suspect something. Jio looked at the data flowing across the screens. The humans were primitive in some ways, yes, but they were also unpredictable. Their immunity to the God King's power meant they had developed completely independently, following their own path. They had built their civilization without any influence from the Assembly, and that made them dangerous in ways that even they might not understand. Send word to Ambassador Sangmei, he ordered. Tell her to continue diplomatic relations as planned. We need time to understand what we're dealing with. As night fell over the Assembly's flagship, Jiho stood at his familiar spot by the window, watching Earth rotate below. The lights of human cities sparkled across the dark side of the planet, and he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this young species might hold. They had laughed at primitive Earth, dismissed it as just another easy conquest. Now that laughter had turned to worry, and worry was beginning to turn to fear. The investigation had revealed not just immunity, but a species that had grown strong in its own unique way, a way that the Assembly had never encountered before. The God King's power had shaped the development of thousands of worlds, guiding them along paths that served the Assembly's purposes. But humans had walked their own path, and now they stood as something unprecedented, a truly independent species, immune to the very power that had built the Assembly's empire. As Jiho contemplated this, he received another message from Earth. James Park was requesting a private meeting with Ambassador Sangmei. The humans were starting to ask questions, and Jiho knew they wouldn't stop until they found answers. The investigation had revealed much about humanity, but he had a feeling they had only scratched the surface of what this species was capable of. The game of secrets and diplomacy was about to become more complicated, and the future of the Assembly hung in the balance. The question was no longer whether humanity would join the Assembly, but whether the Assembly could survive its encounter with humanity. Minna's hands shook as she downloaded the final pieces of data from the Assembly's research center. As a junior scientist working under Chief Scientist Ta-1, she had access to information that could change everything. The truth about the God King's power, the real history of the Assembly, and the terrible secret of how they control thousands of worlds. It was all here. She looked around the empty laboratory one last time. The night shift wouldn't begin for another 20 minutes. That was all the time she needed. Minna took a deep breath and activated her emergency transport beacon, the one she had secretly purchased from an underground merchant 3 months ago. In his office at the United Nations, James Park was reviewing diplomatic reports when a flash of light filled the room. He jumped from his chair, reaching for his phone, but stopped when he saw the young woman in an Assembly Science uniform appearing before him. "Please," Minna said quickly. "I don't have much time. I am Minna, a scientist from the Assembly. I have information you need to know." James studied her carefully. "How did you get past our security?" "Assembly transport technology. But that's not important." She held out a data crystal. "What's important is what's on this. The truth about the Assembly, about the God King, about everything." In orbit above Earth, alarms blared through the Assembly flagship. Haynul rushed to the command center. "Commander, we've detected an unauthorized transport to the surface. It's coming from the research vessel." Jiho's face darkened. "Who?" "Junior scientist Minna. She accessed restricted files before transporting." "Send a recovery team immediately," Jiho ordered, but he already knew it would be too late. If the humans learned the truth now. In New York, James Park sat in a secure room with Minna, watching as she displayed the contents of her data crystal. The holographic images showed thousands of years of Assembly history, but not the version they had been told. "The Assembly isn't a democratic union," Minna explained. "It's an empire built on mental slavery. The God King's power isn't divine. It's a form of psychic control that worked on every species we encountered. Until now. Until humans." James leaned forward. "That's what Ambassador Sangmei tried to do during first contact. Control us." Minna nodded. "But your brains are different. You're immune. Do you understand what this means? 10,000 worlds, all controlled through the God King's power. But you, humans, are free. And when the other species learn this, they might realize they can be free too," James finished. On the Assembly's capital world, God King Do-Young received the news of Minna's defection with cold fury. His silver eyes blazed as he addressed his emergency council. "The humans cannot be allowed to spread this information. Prepare the fleet. If we cannot control Earth, we will destroy it." But Chief Scientist Ta-1 dared to speak up. "My king, consider the consequences. A direct attack on Earth would confirm everything Minna might tell them. The subject worlds would know their resistance is possible. Then what do you suggest? Du Young's voice was dangerous. Let me study them further. Perhaps we can find another way. There is no time. Haynul interrupted through his hologram. The humans are already broadcasting. James Park stood in the UN Broadcast Center, his face displayed on screens across Earth, and thanks to Minna's help, throughout the Assembly's territory. People of Earth, and people of all worlds under Assembly control, you deserve to know the truth. In 10,000 worlds, beings of all species watched as James revealed the Assembly's great secret. Minna provided proof after proof, documents, videos, scientific data. The God King's power was revealed not as divine right, but as a tool of control. On countless planets, the reaction began. Beings who had lived their entire lives under psychic control began to question, to wonder, to think independently for the first time. The God King's power, while still effective, weakened as awareness spread. Aboard the flagship, Jeho watched multiple screens showing unrest spreading across Assembly worlds. Haynul entered the command center, his face grim. The God King demands we begin the attack on Earth immediately, Haynul reported. Jeho stared at the screens. How many ships are battle-ready? 400 in the primary fleet. More can be ready in days. And what about the crews? Jeho asked quietly. Can we trust them now that they know the truth? How many are already breaking free of the God King's influence? In her temporary quarters at the UN, Minna worked with Earth's scientists, explaining Assembly technology and helping them prepare defenses. The Assembly ships are powerful, she told them, but they rely heavily on crews controlled by the God King's power. As that control weakens, James Park coordinated with world leaders as humanity prepared for possible attack. Earth's military forces went on high alert, and weapons that had been aimed at each other for decades were now pointed at the sky. Ambassador Sangmei, still on Earth, found herself in an impossible position. The God King's power was weakening, and for the first time in centuries, she began to think her own thoughts. The experience was terrifying and liberating. She requested an urgent meeting with James Park. I want to help, she said simply when they met. I remember now. Remember what it was like before the God King's control. We were free. The revolution was spreading faster than anyone had expected. On some Assembly worlds, the entire population threw off their mental chains at once. On others, those still under control fought against those who had awakened. The God King's voice boomed through every Assembly ship and facility. Destroy Earth. Destroy it now, before everything is lost. But many weren't listening anymore. Crew members removed their control devices. Ships turned away from Earth. The God King's power, maintained for thousands of years, was unraveling in a matter of days. Jeho stood at his familiar window, watching Earth spin below. Behind him, Haynul waited for orders, growing increasingly agitated. Commander, we must attack. The God King commands it. The God King, Jeho said slowly, is losing his power. And we must decide who we truly are without it. In the research vessel's laboratory, Taiwan worked frantically, trying to understand the cascade of events he was witnessing. The human brain's immunity wasn't just defending against control, it was somehow inspiring resistance in others. The very idea that resistance was possible was breaking the God King's power. As the third day of revelations drew to a close, humanity stood ready. They had never been truly primitive. They had simply developed differently, grown strong in their own way. And now, without even firing a shot, they had begun to bring down an empire that had lasted for thousands of years. The God King raged in his palace, his power weakening with each passing hour. The revolution he had feared for millennia had finally begun, and it had started because of a species that everyone had laughed at, a species that had seemed primitive and weak. But humanity had never been weak. They had been free. And now, They were sharing that freedom with the galaxy. The revelation had changed everything. The next few days would determine the fate of 10,000 worlds. And at the center of it all was Earth, the planet they had laughed at, the planet they had dismissed, the planet that was about to change the course of galactic history forever. The Assembly's grand fleet hung in space like a cloud of metal stars. 400 warships pointed their weapons toward Earth, while hundreds more remained uncertain, their crews breaking free from the God King's control with each passing hour. Supreme Commander Jeho stood on his flagship's bridge, watching the division among his forces. Some ships maintained formation, their crews still under control. Others drifted away, their newly freed crews refusing to attack Earth. "The God King demands we begin the assault," Haynul said, his voice strained. The second in command was fighting against the fading influence himself, his hands shaking as he gripped the command console. Jeho turned to face his old friend. "Haynul, listen to your own thoughts. Are they truly yours, or are they his?" On Earth, humanity prepared for battle. Ships that had once fought each other now flew together. Missiles that had been aimed at cities were now pointed at the stars. The world had united against a common threat. James Park coordinated with military leaders in the UN's Emergency Command Center. Minna and Ambassador Sangmei worked beside him, providing critical information about assembly weapons and tactics. "Their ships are powerful," Minna explained, pointing to technical displays, "but their crews relied on the God King's guidance in battle. Without it, they are confused, unprepared." Sangmei nodded in agreement. The assembly never needed strong tactical training. The God King's power guided our actions, but humans. She looked at the Earth forces with newfound respect. "You have been training for war for centuries." In orbit, the first shots were fired. 3 assembly ships, their crews still loyal to the God King, launched energy beams at Earth's defensive satellites. The attacks struck home, destroying several satellites, but Earth was ready. American fighter jets screamed into space, using technology reverse-engineered from studying the assembly ships. Chinese space cruisers moved to protect population centers. Indian defense platforms activated their shields, designed after analyzing assembly energy signatures. "Impossible," Haynul shouted, watching Earth's response. "They adapted our technology so quickly." Jeho watched the battle unfold. Humanity's weapons were less advanced, but their tactics were superior. They had learned warfare the hard way through centuries of conflict. Now that experience was proving invaluable. On the assembly capital world, God King Do Young felt his power slipping further. More minds broke free with each passing moment. In desperate fury, he issued his final command: "Destroy them all. Destroy everything." But something unexpected happened. As the command echoed through the psychic network, it backfired. The sheer force of his desperate order shattered the remaining bonds. Across 10,000 worlds, minds snapped fully awake. Chief Scientist Ta-1, working with Earth scientists, detected the change. "The network is collapsing. The God King's power is breaking completely." In space, the battle took a decisive turn. Most assembly ships now turned their weapons away from Earth, some even moving to protect the planet from their still-controlled companions. The revolution had reached the fleet. Haynul fell to his knees on the flagship's bridge, the last of the God King's influence leaving him. What have we been doing? All these centuries?" Jeho helped him up, then opened a channel to all ships. "This is Supreme Commander Jeho. The God King's power is broken. We are all free now, thanks to humanity. Stand down all weapons. The war is over before it truly began." James Park received the transmission in the UN Command Center. He turned to Sangmei. "Is it really over?" The ambassador smiled, tears in her eyes. "The fighting is over. The real work is about to begin." In the following days, representatives from Earth traveled to thousands of worlds, helping their populations adjust to freedom. The assembly was transforming. Ships that had come to destroy Earth now carried human advisors to distant planets, helping build new governments and societies. 1 month after the revolution, the first meeting of the new Galactic Council took place. Unlike the old assembly, this was a true democracy. James Park sat as Earth's representative, with Jai-Ho representing the former assembly worlds. Together, they began building something new. "We should have seen it earlier," Jai-Ho said during the first session. "What we thought was primitive was actually pure. Earth developed without outside control, growing strong through its own struggles. We thought ourselves superior, but we were the ones who were truly primitive, living under the control of a false god." The God King's palace became a museum, a reminder of the past. Du Young himself, stripped of his power, was placed under guard. He was no longer a god, just a very old being who had controlled others for far too long. Minna continued her scientific work, now leading a team studying the human brain. Their immunity was not just a defense, she reported to the council. It was a beacon of freedom. The very idea that resistance was possible helped break the God King's power. Humanity did not just resist control. They showed others how to be free. Hanul, fully recovered from the God King's influence, took charge of restructuring the military forces. "We must learn from Earth," he told his officers. "They developed their strength naturally, through their own efforts. That is the path we must now follow." Taiwan established new research protocols across the galaxy. "No more shortcuts," he declared. "No more relying on psychic control. We will advance through science, through cooperation, through genuine progress." Ambassador Sangmei became the head of the new diplomatic corps, working to build trust between formerly controlled worlds and their new human allies. "Earth teaches us that true strength comes from independence," she said during the first graduation of new diplomats. "We must never again mistake control for unity." As the first year of freedom drew to a close, humanity had become teachers to the galaxy. Their history of independence, their cultural resistance to control, their technological development, all became examples for worlds learning to stand on their own. James Park stood at the window of the new council chamber, built in orbit around Earth. The planet shone below, no longer seeming primitive at all. Beside him, Jai-Ho watched ships from 100 worlds moving peacefully through space. "They laughed at Earth once," Jai-Ho said quietly. "Now they learned from it." James nodded. "The best teacher is one who learned their lessons the hard way." Humanity struggled, fought, made mistakes, and grew stronger. Now we can help others do the same. The revolution was complete. The assembly had transformed, and humanity, once dismissed as primitive, had become the guardians of freedom across the galaxy. They had not won through superior weapons or technology, but through something far more powerful, the uncontrollable spirit of a species that had always been free. As new ships rose from Earth, carrying teachers and advisors to distant worlds, the galaxy entered a new age. The age of control was over. The age of freedom had begun.